What if I told you that every day was a blank canvas and you get to choose the story you wish to write for yourself? What's up, fam? This is Don with Street Economics, tapping in with another visionary talk. And today we're going to be talking about rewriting your narrative. Now, in this new year, quote unquote, a lot of people are choosing to write a new story and a new narrative for themselves. So I wanted to make a video helping emphasize this and giving some direction and some things that I've done to rewrite my narrative as well. And before we begin, we're gonna go over this one quote that says your life is like a book, right? You get to choose the story you want to write, you get to choose the chapters, and you get to choose the beginning and the end. I personally think that life is a library comprised of all these different types of books that you choose to write about yourself. Because when we going throughout life, there's many different chapters or sagas, that we go through. And really, when you think about a book, a lot of books have one certain subject or one certain thing that it's mainly talking about, right? So when it comes to writing new stories and new narratives for ourselves, there's basically a library, because the book that you wrote for yourself last year might not be the book you're writing this year. It might be a whole different storyline, new characters, a new setting, these different things that comprise a book, right? That makes up a book. So when it comes to rewriting your story, you just have to remember that at any given moment, you can start a new chapter, you can start a new book. It doesn't have to just be one book. You can have a series of different books that make up your whole story and your legacy in the life we live in today. So we're going to start off with how to rewrite your story, right? Like, what does that even mean? And before every great author writes a book, they contemplate, they think about what this story is going to be about. Like, think about all the great fiction books and all the great books that you have ever read in your life. There's always a prologue, right? Or an introduction. So when you're writing a story, you have to have a new introduction for yourself. You have to get rid of past ideologies or past settings or characteristics you might have had so that you can take on this new form, so that you can write this new story. And once we figure out what the story is going to be about, right, we then have the table of contents. What are these chapters going to look like? Yeah, we might not know exactly how the chapters are going to look, but we can go ahead and write it out. Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve in this new story, right? What's the setting? What's the characters like? Who is the character, right? Are you the main character? Are you a third party that's observing this one character as they go along this journey? One thing that's key about writing new stories is we have to sit and reflect on the old stories and the old narratives that we wrote for ourselves. And that's key, because before you can do something new, you have to look at the past, right? You have to see what type of characteristics did you have, what type of settings and characters that was in your story that's making you want to write a new story. Like, we have to really sit and reflect and think about what we want this new story to comprise of, right? So when we do this, it gives us a good sense of direction of how we want to write this new story. Like, the past stories and narratives for myself, like, I loved it. It was pretty cool. And I think that this new story I'm writing it makes sense, right? It's almost in chronological order of my development and my growth over time. So when you're trying to write a new story, you just have to really sit with yourself for a minute and think. And sometimes you might have to look at what worked and what didn't work. What didn't work in these previous versions of yourself? What didn't work in these previous narratives? Did you like the narratives? Is there certain things that you would change moving forward? Right? Same thing with a book. When authors keep writing books over time, they get better and better. They look at their past works and they use that to help navigate them into this new work that they're creating. So another thing that we can also look at or dive into is how other people played a part in our narrative, right? Did you let other people shape your narrative for you, or was you mostly in control of that? When everybody picks up a book, they read it a different way. I might not read this book the same way that somebody else might read this book. And I think that's also the beauty of stories and narratives, because everybody has a different mindset, or they have different takeaways that they might get from it, or they might have different perspectives. Like, you could be the hero in your story, but you could be the villain in somebody else's story. And that's okay. Like, I think being the villain sometimes is cool, because, like, it just gives an extra dynamic to the plot, right? Like, do it for the plot. It's okay to be the villain. Like, you don't want to be the good guy all the time. Like, even with like Marvel characters. Like, let's look at Thanos, for example. He was the villain to a lot of people, but they never read his previous stories to see what made him become the person that he became when they showed us his story, right? They didn't show us the previous things that Thanos had to go through to become this villain that we see today, right? If he's even the villain for real. So another thing we could do is just gauge like other people's perspectives, like not care about them, but just see how they view us. If I'm the villain in this story, cool. If I'm the villain in people's story, cool. Like, I like that because it makes it more interesting, right? And that's part of the story, right? Like, that's really the beauty of it. So as we begin to comprise our story and write out the plot, you have to really go into the story already embodying what you want to be. So if you're trying to become a certain person or do something specific, you have to already act as if that's already happening. You have to act like you're already living out that story right now. You have to become that which you want to be, right? And we see this in a lot of works and a lot of, let's say, consciousness or spirituality videos where they say you have to be on the same vibration as what you want to be. And I think that's important too, because as we go out through life and we developing our story or we're going through character development, you know where you want to be, right? Like, you have certain aspirations or certain goals that you know you want to achieve. So blending all of that together is going to help the story become fluid. So as we go through these table of contents in these different chapters, you kind of already have a guideline of the route or the path that you want to take. And I think that's very important. And also, when we write in a new narrative for ourselves, we have to have vision. We have to have a clear vision of where we see ourselves. Like, what does this narrative look like for you, right? Even though we're blindly going into this path, we still have a certain vision of potential outcomes that we want, right? Potential resolutions. Like, most people know how they want their book to end. Like, you know how you want your story to end. Like, a lot of people want their story to end great, like a good ending, a happy ending. So what we have to do is we have to write our story in a way that's going to guarantee us that happy ending. We have to do things, take on habits, meet new people, and try new things and take risks that will help us get to that end goal. And another thing we can do is adapt. I think adapting is important because at any given moment, you might have to switch certain things up. You might have to switch characters in and out. You might have to switch characteristics or switch your archetype into something different, right? Depending on the environment and what's going on in your life. Sometimes you may be going through a trial or a period where you're not really the person you want to be, but that's part of the story, right? It's always a hero's journey in most of these stories where let's say something bad happens to a character, they go into isolation or they go into this silent moment where they're sitting back, reflecting, working on the person that they want to become, which is also called the dark night of the soul. And then they take the steps necessary to propel themselves forward, right? Like, that's the beauty of the story. You can't skip any steps. It's no ups without downs. Like, life isn't a linear path at all. So your story is going to have some up moments and it's going to have some down moments as well. Just like with any other character development. If we look at any movie or any story nowadays, most of them have a period where the character is faced with a problem, right? And they have to find a solution for that problem. And that's with every story. So if you're at a certain period where you have a problem in your story, then you have to find a solution. Whether you write it out, whether you have to think it out, whether you have to plan it out, it doesn't matter. But we know that we have a problem that needs to be solved. So we need to really sit and reflect and brainstorm and ideate what type of things that we can do to solve this problem and move forward in our story. And another thing I like in stories is plot twists, right? It's always plot twists in the story. Whether you made the plot twist or just something in the environment happened that made you go down a certain plot twist that you wasn't expecting. And sometimes people get faced with this difficulty because they don't know how to navigate the plot twist. And I think that the plot twist is all about being able to improvise, right? In any given circumstance, you should be able to improvise and work a way throughout the story. Like, it makes it so much more interesting, right? Whether your story is mysterious or whether it's concise and it's all laid out, being able to navigate that plot is super interesting, and it's going to look interesting from the outside looking in. And the only reason I'm talking about other people's narratives towards us and other perspectives is because that's also a part of the story. A lot of people let other people's narratives influence how they move or influence their own story. But when a writer writes a book, they're not really thinking about how other people are going to perceive it. They're writing the story based on how they feel and what they want to do and what they want to portray to the masses, right? To the audience. So it's all about what you want to do and the story you choose to write for yourself. How other people perceive what you do, that's on them. You can't control how other people are going to think and see and view your story. You just have to keep writing that story. And if they watching, be fresh as hell doing it, right? Make it something worth reading. If I'm the villain in somebody else's story, I'm gonna make it worth it. I'm gonna make sure they have a story to tell. You know what I'm saying? Like being the villain in people's stories is often interesting because when they say their viewpoint of you or they say their perspective of your story, it's all third person, right? Like it's not your point of view, but you can't let it affect you because only you know your motives and how you wanted your story to play out. So like me, for example, like I became the villain in a lot of people's story this past year, and I love it. The plot twist and being the good guy, bad guy. Like I don't really care how I perceive myself to be towards others. Like I know what my story is. Like it's times I had to become the villain. It's gonna be times where you have to become the villain sometimes, right? It's gonna be times where you can be the good guy, where you can be the extra, but you just have to know how to navigate yourself and what you want for yourself in your story. Another thing we want to talk about within the story is characters. Characters are very important because they help build up the story. The same characters that's in the beginning of the story might not be at the end of the story. When you're going on a path in life, it's a lot of people that come in and out of your life, but you can't dwell on that. That's all part of the story. You just have to keep going. And the beauty of that is you can choose what characters you want to be in and what characters you don't want to be in your story. And I think that's another thing that people may face because they may be trying to get somewhere or they might be trying to write a certain narrative for themselves, but the people within their current story is stopping them from becoming the person that they want to be, right? Or the end goal that they have for themselves. So you have to really look at the characters involved in your story and see if they're helping you reach that end of the story or if they're preventing you from doing that. Another thing we're going to talk about is the setting. Setting is everything. Environment is everything. Where you are placing yourself and the things that you're going and doing is important in the story, right? A lot of people love to travel and love to try new things and experience new things. So you have to intertwine that into your story. You have to travel, you have to see new things, you have to go to new places so that you can have more experience and just more things to curate for your story. Like a story is very interesting when it's a lot of different settings and things going on, right? Like if you look at a movie and it's the same setting, let's say it's on the beach the whole entire movie, you might get bored because you're not seeing anything different. Once you see things that are different, life becomes more interesting, and then you can incorporate that into your narrative as well. So as we go on through this story of life, this book of life, this library of life, you can take on as many forms as you want. You can become as many archetypes as you want. Like there's really no limit to none of this. When you look at a library, it's comprised of all these different types of books, right? Whether it's fictional, non-fictional. Let's say we got sci-fi, we got romance, we got thrillers, we got all these different stories in all these books. It's gonna be times in your life where you're going through a romance story and it might end up bad, right? It might be the perfect love story at first, and then it turns into a thriller, right? Or a thriller, whatever they call it, where shit ends tragic and you never seen it coming. You have to be able to appreciate experiences for what they are and be able to move on. Because like we said earlier, everything is a part of the story. So when you know what you want your end story to be like, you have to be willing to accept and understand that it's going to be random things going on that's part of the story, but you can't let it get you down, right? You can't get too consumed with the things going on. Like, it's going to be devastating parts of the story, and it's going to be very peaceful and very climatic parts of the story as well. And I think that's what really make everything like just so much more interesting when it comes to story building and building that narrative for yourself. And also within stories, there's always going to be highlights, right? Like highlight moments, key moments. Like, let's say you get married, let's say you have a baby, let's say you get that job, you get that house. We have to use parts of the story like that to be able to pivot and excel ourselves for more moments like that, right? Because we all love when a movie does something like fire, right? Or when you're reading a book and something like mad cool happen, right? Like, it becomes more magnetic and people want to read more about it. You need to be able to have these climatic events and still let them happen continually, right? You don't just want one climatic event in your story. You want to have several climatic events, and you want to have several achievements and milestones, because as you shape your story, it's going to make your story so much more interesting, right? Especially when you're telling others your story or your narrative. At the end of the day, man, you just have to keep writing your story, keep building your narratives, keep developing your character, keep taking on new skill sets, new opportunities, new adventures, because all of this stuff is just part of the plot. Like, my little sister be saying, do it for the plot. And this year, I'm gonna definitely be just doing things for the plot, right? Just having fun, enjoying life. Like, don't get too caught up in the bad and the negative. You know what I'm saying? Like, just live life. Like, everything is gonna work for the greater good at the end, especially if you know that you're writing your story a certain way. You have to appreciate all the good moments and the bad moments. So for these next 365 days, 364 days, really use every single day as a blank canvas to write your story. Keep writing. If you don't like something, take it out. You know what I'm saying? Move forward. You can renew the story. You can add plot twists. You can add new characters. You can change up the setting. You can write the story however you want to write it. And that's what's most important at the end of the day. I appreciate everybody that's been supporting the page so far. We have much more work to do. I can't wait to roll out these other visionary talks and other content ideas that I have in mind. If this resonated with you and you're ready to keep building your story for your new arc, make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for more visionary talks. Peace.